Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Uzo Obienu. I'm an Associate Director with the Tax and Regulatory Division of KPMG in Nigeria. I will be your moderator today for this CFO event titled The Nigerian Economy in 2022 and Beyond, Opportunities for Private Sector Growth. I would like to take us through a few housekeeping. Thereafter, I will invite Tola Adeyemi to formally welcome us to this event. So in terms of housekeeping, you will already come in muted and will remain muted unless there is a need to unmute you so that you can make a contribution. Otherwise, we would like you to use the chat box to drop any comments or observation. In case there is anything you notice and you want to alert us, please use the chat box. But for questions in particular, we would like you to use the question and answer feature on the Zoom platform. So without further waste of time, I would like to invite Tola Adeyemi. Tola Adeyemi is the partner and head of our audit practice in KPMG Nigeria, and the one that is very familiar with the CFOs. And I would like to invite him to do a formal welcoming of our CFOs to today's event. Over to you, Tola.
Thank you, Uzo. Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome from all of us at KPMG to the 2022 KPMG CFO Forum webinar. Many of you are regulars at our CFO Forum, and so you know what to expect. But I know that there are some CFOs who are joining us for the very first time. So let me provide some context. You know that even at the best of times, the job of the CFO is a very challenging, complex, and sometimes lonely role because of the number of variables and different expectations that CFOs have to contend with. But it just seems that in Nigeria, there's an added layer of unpredictability that gets added to everything. And that just creates a fog of uncertainty through which companies and CFOs have to navigate. It is into this fog of uncertainty that the CFO Forum attempts to shine a light. Firstly, by bringing key government officials and regulators, as well as policy influencers, to come and speak directly with CFOs and enable CFOs to ask them questions directly. Secondly, it provides an opportunity for CFOs to hear directly from fellow CFOs who are often grappling with the very same challenges that you as CFOs are grappling with. And thirdly, the forum provides a strategic perspective by ensuring that as you deal with the challenges of today, you also have an eye on the future and are looking at the things that are likely to impact the role and functioning of the CFO in the future. Our agenda today encompasses all three of those elements. And within the next 2 hours, we will hear from a key advisor to government in the person of the Chief Economic Advisor to the President. We will also hear from fellow CFOs as they discuss their perspectives on some of the things that need to be done to capitalize on the opportunities for private sector growth. And then lastly, we will have that strategic perspective by looking at the finance function of the future and talking about what we need to do today to prepare for that future. By the end of this session this morning, we hope to have illuminated a path through the fog that enables you to get on with your journey. It promises to be exciting, so let's get started. I invite Kunle Elebute, the senior partner of KPMG Nigeria and chairman of KPMG Africa, to give us his opening remarks. Kunle, over to you.
Thank you, Tola. I hope you can all hear me very well, loud and clear. And good morning, participants. Welcome, as Tola said, to this CFO Forum session. My job is fairly easy, and just to lay the ground for Doyin Salami to take us through his own thoughts around how we can grow the private sector in Nigeria in 2022 against the backdrop of a global economic challenge that all countries are facing with the challenges in Ukraine and Russia. So if I just take you through a few highlights of the recent economic policies that the government has come up with to drive growth in private sector in 2022, there are just a few of them. Number one is, something called the 100 for 100 policy on production and productivity, which is a financial instrument the Central Bank launched last year to try and increase the flow of money investments to firms so that these firms can have the ability to catalyze economic growth, accelerate transformation, promote diversification, and also boost productivity. So far, the Central Bank has disbursed over 29 billion to companies that applied for the 100 for 100 PPP. Now, these companies are supposed to also generate employment, which is very, very important for us at this point in time. Second one is the Finance Act 2021, which is I think it's the third time we've had the Finance Act being passed along with the appropriation bill. It was signed into law on 31 December 2021. One of the biggest things there was to reduce minimum tax from 0.5 to 0.25%. And also to provide tax-saving opportunities for companies and harmonizing the minimum tax provision and fiscal equity, which is a complaint that a number of you had in the previous years. The third area is what I call the CBN's RC200 FX program, which is aimed to stimulate non-oil exports with a 200 billion FX income target in the next 3 to 5 years. Daunting challenge, I must say, but Central Bank wants to work with the banks to fund the construction of dedicated non-oil export terminals to eliminate the delays that you currently experience by exporters. Some exporters in Nigeria, for example, take their goods to Lome for them to export out into the global market. This scheme will provide loans to companies for value addition and production of finished goods for exports at 5% for a 10-year period with 2 years of moratorium. So again, it's a fairly decent instrument to try and ensure that companies can actually be able to ramp up their export production. And the final one, of course, which all of us probably are very familiar with, is the Petroleum Industry Act, PIA, of 2021, which that implementation of the new PAS Act has commenced. There's a focus to drive greater investment in the oil and gas industry, optimizing costs and ensuring transparency and upgrading industry assets and infrastructure. But as you know, of course, one of the key salient points of that act was to stop the subsidy this year. But that element of the act, we understand, is going to be removed and maybe postponed until next year when we have a new government in power. But anyway, let me stop at this point. I think I've just to capture a few items of policies, and I'm going to hand over to Doyin Salami, who's going to now take us through his own detailed presentation of exactly what you as CFOs need to be aware of for us to drive economic growth in 2022. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Kunle, and thank you Tola too for the warm welcome. We are going to go into the next section of this event, and we would like to introduce our guests in the person of Dr. Doyin Salami. Next page, please. Okay, Dr. Doyin Salami is one that does not need so much of a formal introduction, but if you permit me, I will read out a few lines on some of the accomplishments of Dr. Doyin Salami, who is currently the Chief Economic Advisor to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. He was previously the Chairman of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council that was set up in 2019. He's a member of the Monetary Policy Committee. Was a member of the Monetary Policy of the Central Bank of Nigeria, the International Monetary Fund Advisory Group for Sub-Saharan Africa, and he sits on the board of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. He's co-chair the Central Organizing Committee for the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. He was a co-chair in 2009 and was a member of the Monetary Policy Committee from 2010 up until 2017. Dr. Doyin Salami is a Nigerian economist, lecturer, and consultant. He holds a doctorate degree in economics from Queen Mary College, University of London. He is also a senior fellow and associate professor at the Lagos Business School, Pan-Atlantic University. Please, would you join me to welcome our special guest and keynote speaker, Dr. Doyin Salami. Dr. Doyin, over to you, please.
Right. A very good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for the consideration of extending an invitation to me this morning. And I hope we all have a meaningful interaction. Well, what am I going to do this morning? Well, yeah, I'm going to share my own sense of where things are. Please remember two things. One, I am an advisor. Two, I am the newest kid on the block. So right now, still in a transition phase, trying to understand where I'm supposed to put my right leg and where my right arm should not go. The intention from me this morning is essentially to look at the economy in 2022 and beyond, and to speak to the notion of opportunities for the private sector. Now, this is the way in which I've organized my thinking. You know, what drives the economy, its current characteristics, the outlook in 2022 and beyond, and then what the opportunity space looks like. So I am now the President's Chief Economic Advisor, but let me begin by, making a general set of statements, and then we'll come back to the presentation. I do not misunderstand or underestimate the nature of the challenge that companies, well, Nigeria as a whole, not just companies, that Nigeria as a whole has to live with at this point, or is living through at this point. If nothing else, globally, we've seen the world challenged, just as it was beginning to move away from COVID-related disruptions. We've seen a new disruption essentially coming out of the Black Sea area, the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and the disruption to global economic activity that has wrought. Across the world, we have seen what I can only describe as a cost of living crisis, as commodity prices have risen very sharply. In Nigeria, in my view, what we are seeing is in part the impact of Russia-Ukraine. But Russia-Ukraine has simply come and exacerbated existing fault lines. And it is, that which we need to understand and then figure out, so what next? I will, in a moment, speak to some of the themes around my own sense of where we are and what the opportunities are. But a couple of things to quickly say. In my view, the sense in which there is a crisis also, in my view, offers an opportunity or a major set of opportunities for reform in Nigeria. In terms of the global influences, and for me, Nigeria, global, and I'm sure some of you have seen me use this slide before, it simply represents my fundamental thinking about how Nigeria, what affects Nigeria, that global conditions have an impact on the Nigerian space. And the global conditions are affecting us currently in at least, two domains. One, with regard to food security, with regard to food security. Second, an increase in costs. That's what I characterized earlier as a cost of living crisis that globally is being felt, and different countries are adapting to it in different ways. So food, and certainly on the energy side, where there are other issues, or shall we say subsidiary issues, are on the fiscal side, because ordinarily an increase in crude oil prices should ease some of Nigeria's pressures. But given that Nigeria is currently producing about 1.3 million barrels of crude oil per day, then I don't think anybody is surprised that the fiscal, indeed, the fiscal is such that it's now a double-edged sword. On the one hand, yes, oil prices have gone up, and they should normally translate into higher revenues. But because crude oil production is low, 1.3, and my own sense of an estimate is that Nigeria probably needs to be doing about 1.5 million barrels of crude oil per day for it to be fiscally meaningful. And therefore, in my view, this certainly raises a challenge, and in my view, it raises some potentially interesting opportunities. The other key headache that that at least I've heard, arises with Forex. Again, normally higher oil prices globally should translate into better availability. But as we know, again, given the challenge around production numbers, then the Forex reserves remain largely where they are. The kind of increase we have seen in oil prices that have gone from about $20 in March 2020 to where they currently are, we haven't seen that same magnitude or anywhere near it of improvements in our Forex numbers. And so to that extent, you can already see a bit of a decoupling. Now, where do I then see us going? In terms of an outlook, available numbers, and that is largely PMI, Purchasing Managers Index, both locally and globally, is seeming to suggest that, for example, the Russia-Ukraine crisis, its impact as yet, and I put that caveat, as yet, does not seem to be on the output side. It seems to be more on the cost side than it is on the output side. And so it will be interesting to see, how if that evolves. So locally and globally, we're still seeing PMI numbers, at least for the first quarter. Yes, Russia-Ukraine didn't start until towards the end of February, but essentially midway through the first quarter. But as of the end of March, the PMI numbers suggest, both locally and globally, they remain above 50, above the threshold of 50, which therefore suggests that output is still increasing. And so My sense on the basis of that is simply that we will see growth in 2022. We will see growth in 2023 and 2024, and hopefully beyond that. I usually don't like going beyond 3 years. I think I'm long enough in the tooth as an economist to understand, that particular arrangement. Having said that, what then are the opportunities that I think might actually arise? I'm going to go into a bit of detail around some of these issues in a minute, but this is just me trying to set out, my thoughts. My view is that the fiscal crisis or the fiscal challenge, not necessarily yet a crisis, but the fiscal challenge that we certainly face potentially has a paradoxical opportunity that perhaps this might now enable us to undertake some of the reforms that perhaps we need to undertake. Some reforms that would be good to do are certainly not on the table. At least before I joined the government, the policy had already been established that fuel subsidies, for example, are not going anywhere. At least fuel prices, fuel subsidies are going to remain. But in my view, the challenge around the fiscus means that Nigeria will have to start thinking differently about how we fund things. The opportunity of deploying Nigeria's balance sheet on the back of contingent liabilities, I think, is far too attractive not to be explored meaningfully. How that can be done, I will come back to that, shortly. A second thing that I think the opportunity space opens up is that we as a country need to appreciate that, and forgive the analogy of a boat sailing analogy. When you sail, the wind blows. You don't bother about the wind. You bother about positioning your sails, the boat's sails, positioning them to take maximum advantage of the breeze or the wind, whatever the direction is, to minimize its adverse impact, if any, and to maximize its positive impact. And for me, the wind in the world at the moment is a realization that globally, the biggest area of growth now, and that has been over the last, certainly 5 years, is direct foreign investment. I'm one of those who takes a view that, well, yes, you need foreign portfolio investment essentially as a precursor, forerunner to direct foreign investment or direct investment. It doesn't have to be foreign, by the way. But unless we are positioned as a country to appreciate what DFI requires and to enable DFI be interested in Nigeria, the resource envelope from which we are trying to grow this economy is just too small. You don't need to be a genius, just do the numbers. All the budgets across the federation, in other words, the government side budget, whether it's federal, state, local government, are less than $70 billion in a year. And that is in a decent year. And yet we are talking of 200 million people. The kind of infrastructural gaps that we are trying to close, the kinds of human development gaps that we must close, all of these require resources that the public sector is just not going to be able to offer. There's no need to be unduly bashful or sentimental about that. We must also understand that some things in the short term are going to remain. As I said earlier, some subsidies are going to remain, petrol, for example. But my sense is that in the medium to long term, as some conditions change domestically, these will also have to change. But the other piece that I find interesting as far as the kind of things that could change the ball game as far as Nigeria is concerned is that no matter how I look at where we are, it seems very clear to me that we are going to have to do things very, very differently. So our aversion to markets will change. And by the way, even though this is not anywhere publicly stated, but the fact that the central bank has announced that from the end of this year, it will not make any allocations of FX to domestic money banks, to the banks, simply says to me that we are now in a transition to a new Forex regime. And that Forex regime, however, whatever may be its characteristics, will certainly have to have a price discovery mechanism, independent, is what I can see. But in addition to that, that transition will enable us to hopefully effect the same kind of change that you as CFOs are familiar with from what happened to us about 15 years ago. 15 years ago, thereabout, Nigeria didn't have a full yield curve. We had essentially a short-term yield curve. But today, on the basis of certain reforms, we now have a full-scale yield curve ranging from overnight to 20 years and beyond. And so these are some of the changes that I see, in the pipeline, and which I think should, properly embedded, make significant difference to how we go in the years ahead. But in addition to, policy changes, two other key dimensions of change that I think are important for looking beyond 2022. One important element of that is how spending patterns are changing, because we are beginning to see, as you look at the consumer basket, we are seeing certain changes that suggest people are spending their money differently. Notwithstanding a recession, we are seeing a change from subsistence to lifestyle. And the other key dimension that I think will change the dynamics around the opportunity space in Nigeria is going to be the Africa CFTA. My view is that, yes, I have seen or I have heard expressed a lot of reservations around the Africa CFTA. Fortunately, quite a number of the significant protocols are still in the process of being finalized. And my view remains that Nigeria has a basis, a very solid basis, being the fourth most diversified industrial economy on the continent, not necessarily the most efficient or productive, but certainly the fourth most diversified, provides us a platform from which we can move. And so I see that there are short-term challenges that we are all having to deal with at the moment. Some of them arising from global circumstances, a number of them arising from domestic circumstances, or where international circumstances have worsened domestic circumstances. Now, let me just quickly run through this presentation and then we can move along smoothly. So as I said earlier, for me, global conditions are very important in terms of where Nigeria is. And as I had also said earlier, what we are seeing in terms of the Nigerian economy, if I look at what the PMI numbers are saying, is essentially that, well, growth is still happening. So in other words, the recovery of the economy from COVID seems not to be being affected by the challenges around the Russia-Ukraine, at least as at now. But there are a couple of things that I think we kind of need to watch out for. One is high costs. Inflation in Nigeria, despite the fact that it's been coming down over the last 12 months thereabout. What we are seeing globally is likely to give an impetus to that. But please note that as we are finding, our oil sector remains weak. It's been a drag on growth, for quite a while. I've also made the point, or I also make the point here about the cost of borrowing, being high if you are not a prime borrower. And it's interesting, as I had earlier said, and which is illustrated on the graph in the right, the graph on the right, that we've seen an increase in oil prices, but not a similar improvement in reserves. Now, but when I look at this economy structurally, there are some interesting numbers. I'm an empirical person, so it's what the numbers tell me. One of the things that I find interesting and which I hope will sustain is that the economy seems to be drifting, albeit gently, back towards economic stability. It doesn't feel like that, by the way, but economic stability, for those who are interested, is simply that combination of three or four things. You're looking for economic growth, in other words, output growth. You're looking for that to be combined with hopefully low, but certainly falling prices. And you're looking for that to be combined with external balance, at least if not external balance, preferably an external surplus, but certainly an external balance. And what we've seen, even in the two domains that seem not to be doing very well, so we are seeing recovery on the output side. On the price side, as I showed a short moment, a moment or two ago, prices have come down, or the rate of their increase has come down. However, they remain high. And the third domain, which is the external balance, as I looked at the numbers at the end of 2021, external deficit, I think, was about $4 billion, and it had been as high as 8, 9, I think even at one point about $10 billion was our external deficit. Now, this is unusual for Nigeria, essentially because oil has tended to keep us out of the deficit zone. But what this is simply telling me is that, okay, so we are not yet at macroeconomic stability sweet point, but we seem to be at least gently drifting towards it. But we need to accelerate that. The piece that I think is a bit of, some concern is that, yes, even though incomes are rising, but inflation is essentially overwhelming any increases in income. And I try to draw attention, on a historic basis. In 1990, if you have heard me say this before, please forgive me. In 1990, Nigeria's income per head was about $560. China was about $380. In 2021, Nigeria is around 2,000. China is slightly over 12,000. In that same period, exchange rates in Nigeria have moved from 8 to 1 to, well, whatever it is that you're buying it now, but it certainly can't be less than about 415. And in China, it's moved from 4.7 to about 7.6. So the point that I draw attention to there is that, look, it's not about devaluation. Devaluation, we've done a lot of that. What we haven't done, and which we must now do, is prepare and position ourselves for investment as an investment destination. Now, again, structurally, we're beginning to see an improvement in access to credit. But the pieces that, bother me a bit, and I think that this, is in terms of the structural evolution of the economy, of the economy's output. We are not seeing the kind of industrial takeoff that needs. Nigeria, in my view, needs to find industrial activity accounting for not less than 25, preferably about 30% of her output. That, in my view, is the way that creates jobs. And in order to do that, we need greater efficiencies. we certainly need a large amount of investment. And that for me is the single biggest opportunity, that Nigeria needs a large amount of investment, and that investment cannot, with all due conscience, with the best will in the world, the public sector envelope is simply too small to be able to accommodate that. Now, but one thing that we have certainly seen is that the payment system in Nigeria has been absolutely transformed from being check-driven. Now, internet payments are actually the biggest piece in terms of transactions within the Nigerian space. Now, as I already said, in terms of our outlook, I think given the numbers and given where we are, my own expectations remain that, yeah, we will see growth in 2022. Now, let me put a caveat that assuming that nothing else comes at us from the global environment that really worsens the situation that beyond what it is now, I think we will still see growth. What we are unlikely to see is growth that is significantly above population growth. Now, the ideal would be, in my view, for Nigeria to be growing at least at twice population growth. It's unlikely that we will see that at this time, because, as I said, both international environments not very clement and also the domestic environment, the fault lines have certainly worsened. Now, I've spoken a lot about, at least I've mentioned in passing that, Russia, Ukraine, well, the impact is there, but I think the real headache in terms of opportunities in Nigeria is probably insecurity. If you look at the Nigerian numbers, there is now increasingly a nexus between insecurity and output. If you, let me start with the good news piece of this. Actually, I was pleasantly, as you know, I reviewed the numbers. There seem to be some numbers that are suggesting that food production in the Northeast, Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe, I think, is doing much better than it had done in the past. However, the Northwest, with the issues around banditry, with the issues around kidnapping, is a source of concern. In the South, with Nigeria producing 1.3 million barrels of crude oil per day, in my understanding of the numbers, I think Nigeria needs to do a minimum of about 1.5 million barrels of crude oil. And by that I mean excluding condensates, because condensates typically are added to Nigeria's overall numbers, and they give you about condensates about 300,000 barrels per day. So for me, what we are seeing is so in the Delta, there is one of the key reasons why the oil numbers are that low is, as you know, many of my colleagues in, some of my colleagues in government have already pointed out, essentially industrial scale theft of oil. It really is, in a very bad way. And so for me, that is probably the biggest threat. The good news is that the government is taking this very, very seriously, and I'm expecting, given what is ongoing at the moment, to see a reduction in issues around pipeline vandalization in the Delta area, and hoping that we will also see a similar improvement in the Northwest, North Central parts of Nigeria. Well, I already spoke about the Ukraine-Russia crisis, but as I said, what the numbers are currently showing is that, notwithstanding this conflict, its impact has been more on cost than it has been on output. However, there are some headaches that we have to deal with. There are, as I said, domestic pieces. We are seeing lower oil prices. We are seeing our fiscal risks enlarge. And any which way, we've got an election coming. Now, so what then, having said we will see growth, well, costs I expect to remain high, driven, even though it's been dropping for the last year or so. But my sense is that given what's going on globally, it's probably we should expect an increase in costs before it perhaps begins to come down. But what are the opportunities in the private sector 2022 and beyond? And for me, there are probably a couple of things. So the first thing, as I have drawn your attention to earlier, is that we're seeing a change in how Nigerians spend their money, which means some opportunities are opening up. In 2003, as this shows, we used to spend not almost, 2/3 of our expenditure was on food. As of 2019, yeah, that's 3 years ago, but we don't have figures that are more current than that. It's dropped to 56%, even though it had been lower 10 years ago. And the reason that I think it has increased in the last 10 years is that we've gone through 2 recessions in the last 10 years. And that has really put pressure on Nigerians, leading to a higher spend on food as a basic component. But there are some interesting dimensions in all of this. If you look, for example, even under food and beverages, the share in total expenditure of restaurants and hotels has actually risen quite sharply. Beyond that, if you look at what is happening in terms of the spend on transport, the spend on communication, the spend on education, and also the spend on healthcare. All of these are simply speaking to a changing composition of spend, which points to opportunities in sectors that are now the beneficiary of higher levels of spending. But we should not, in my view, allow the current global crisis, and especially the crisis around our fiscus, to go to waste. These 2 graphs simply show 2 things. First is that oil production has actually been drifting lower over the last over the last 10, 12 years, thereabout. But the second thing is that we're also seeing a detachment of our fiscal numbers, federation accounts, my apologies, federation account numbers from crude oil prices. Again, that is in part, that's due to 2 things. 1, lower oil production, and 2, the size of the subsidy. And so for me, what this draws attention to are probably 2 things. First, even notwithstanding the progress that has been made in terms of strategic revenue initiatives in the non-oil sector, I think the overall size of Nigeria's public sector resource envelope is actually too small for the kind of growth and development that this economy needs. In my view, the economy needs to be growing at twice the rate at which population grows, and it's got to do that probably for about a decade. And I am of the view that it can actually do that. And so what's going to drive that is going to be the imperative of growing private sector investment. Nigeria has got to be a bit less, how do I put this? Nigeria seems to have a fear of markets. And in my view, that fear of markets needs to be tamed and replaced by efficient, meaningful regulation of markets. That way, investment, private sector investment can actually come into Nigeria. And there are at least 2 dimensions of that kind of come to my view, into my own purview. The first of those is Nigeria using her balance sheet as a guarantee, essentially contingent liabilities. There are so many opportunities that I have that have been drawn to my attention and that have been in discussions around over the last 5-6 weeks, where it appears that the opportunity for investment is there, provided investors, which does not require Nigeria to put cash on the table, provided that the sense that investors get is of an environment where they are welcome. And I think that is probably the biggest thing that we are going to have to deal with. And fortunately, as I'm sure you all know, there's PBEC, and they are currently in the process of getting legislation passed that consolidates all the, that reviews and amends a whole slew of legislation that is hindering of investment. So for me, it's important that Nigeria must take advantage of global wins that speak to private, that speak to direct foreign investment as a major tool that supports growth. And that's exactly, what I aim to show here, that as at the end of as at the third quarter of 2021, global FDI, and I'm not here talking about FPI, global FDI amounted to about $820 billion. Now, Nigeria's share of that is very minuscule and diminishing. And the key question has got to be, how do we change that picture? Unless we are able to change that picture and get FDI, my sense of where the global economy is now is that countries are investing in, or countries are stimulating foreign direct investment, because I think there is now an increasing realization that export growth is going to slow. It's not going to be zero. Growth is not going to be zero, but exports are going to be slow or slower as production and consumption happen in hubs. COVID pointed out to everybody our great dependence on Asia, especially China. And of course, one of the fallouts of that is a lot of countries are reviewing what should they import and all of that. And so increasingly, my sense is that we are going to see a period, or I expect to see a period, where globalization grows less quickly, and that the kind of globalization we will see is a globalization based on foreign direct investment. And the key challenge has got to be, how does Nigeria position itself for all of that? And one of the key dimensions in that positioning is, how do we manage our foreign exchange markets? As I said to you in my earlier opening, that look, the central bank has announced that by the end of this year, it will no longer sell FX to banks. It has already stopped selling FX to BDCs. And in my view, that is a signal of transition to a new foreign exchange regime. There is no way that, having made this announcement, unless it doesn't go through with it, and I see no reason why it will not go through with it, essentially what the central bank has signaled is a transition to a new FX regime. By the way, my own comments here are not driven by the RT200 program, or indeed any other program, or any other current program. All I'm simply saying is that we are likely to see a new FX regime emplaced, which will have to have price discovery, which will have to have opportunities, a market created that enables both suppliers and users of FX to interact. And I've put this graph on the left-hand side just to illustrate something. That when you look at the inflows of FX in Nigeria, indeed, there's another graph which I probably will include in the deck that I will share, that the organizers will share with you. When you look at this, FX inflows through the central bank are significantly lower than FX inflows into Nigeria through non-central bank sources. Indeed, my own analysis suggests that FX through the central bank is probably is less than 40% of the total FX utilized in Nigeria. And so it kind of puts on the table and a transition, as I said, from where we currently are into a new arrangement. The specific details of that new arrangement, I dare say, will become available or will become clearer as we go along. But the mere announcement of that of that regime signals to me that things are about to change, and it's they are likely to change in ways that we probably hadn't been thinking about, and only those who reflect very carefully are likely to position themselves to take advantage. Now,
Dr. Salami, please.
As a final point, in the short term, it's important to say that there are a couple of things that we are going to have to do. We're going to have to figure a way of reducing inflation as to make Nigeria more cost competitive. We're going to have to figure a way as to addressing our fiscal issues. We're going to have to be able to stimulate private investment for job creation and continue programs that provide protection for the vulnerable. So for me, I'm clear in my mind that there are challenges at the moment. There are opportunities that are already being signaled. The key question then becomes, which of these are we able to bring to reality, and how quickly, and who then do we enable to take them? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salami. Thank you for taking our time to make this presentation. Clear from your presentation that as a country, we need to rethink our funding options with emphasis on foreign direct investment, and quickly see how we can stimulate the private sector to ensure that jobs are created, and also manage inflation as well as our fiscal pressures that the country is currently facing. Thank you very much. I'm sure our guests, our participants have learned a thing or two, and we may be having a lot of questions from your presentation as we move on. What we will do next is to invite, have a session with some CFOs who will hopefully, share their experiences, and other CFOs can also learn. And then we'll also have you be part of that discussion. But to do that, I will invite my colleague and friend, Nara Ogun. Nara is an associate director with the Department for Professional Practice in our audit division. And she will be anchoring this. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Uzo, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the panel and the Q&A session. We have about 40 minutes to do this, and the objective of this session is really to leave CFOs with actionable steps, for them to be able to navigate the current business challenges to spur growth in their organizations and different sectors at large. Joining us for this panel discussion alongside Dr. Doyin Salami are three CFOs who have been handpicked for this session. First is Mrs. Yemisi Rotimi Dokemo, who is the Chief Officer of Leadway Assurance Limited. Mrs. Yemisi has over 25 years of experience in finance, and she is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, and she's also an associate member for several other institutes across the globe. Secondly is Mr. Vicenjo Auchelo, who is the head of administration, finance, and control in Saipem in Nigeria. He holds the regional role of business partner administration, and he has a first degree in business management and accounting. He also has a master's degree in management and business administration. He was a former auditor, and he's held several roles in Saipem across different countries, which includes Nigeria, Egypt, and the United States. Lastly, but not the least, is Mrs. Funke Ijaya Oladipo, who is the Group Finance Director of UAC Nigeria PLC. She has over 15 years of experience in operations, finance, and corporate finance, as well as the capital markets. She also holds a BSc in economics and an MSc in project and enterprise management from the University College London. Join me in welcoming the panelists. We've heard from Dr. Doyin Salami that we are all faced with different challenges, you know, from the cost of living, from the cost of production, you know. So based on the order of the introductions, I would just like the CFOs to please use 3 minutes to let us know what the 3 significant challenges that you have faced in your organizations and how you've been able to manage the impact of these challenges in your organizations. Over to you, Mrs. Yemisi.
Okay. Good morning. Please confirm that I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my thoughts this morning. And thank you to Dr. Doyin Salami for such an insightful presentation. I mean, from our perspective within the insurance industry, I want to align very much with a lot of the macroeconomic issues that Dr. Doyin Salami talked about. And particularly for us, one of the challenges is around the FX regime and the interest rate and conditions, which has a direct, impact on our bottom line. So for us within the insurance industry, for example, there are 2 ways you make money. You make money either from technical performance or from investment performance of your investment portfolio. But we have a situation where inflation is about 15–16%. Average 10-year bond, for example, is somewhere around 11.5%. So in real terms, you find that you're actually not, in terms of generation from your investment portfolio, you're already in a negative territory. So that is a serious challenge for us as a business. And therefore, it's really about being creative and also looking at the investment portfolio over the longer term, as opposed to the short-term approach to investment. So that is one challenge. The other challenge is on the people side, and I think everybody is aware of the Great Resignation, or should I say, the Great Quit. And part of that is a fallout from COVID, but particularly also we have a peculiar situation in Nigeria, where because of prevailing economic conditions, there's a lot of immigration. So while people have had to reprioritize and reevaluate their lifestyle and decide that work is not going to be the beginning and the end of their life, more in Nigeria, it's more about survival. So you find people emigrating to other areas, and we are losing skilled and experienced staff to these areas. And I think for us as employers and as owners of businesses, the owners of the North is to really look at how we can enable our employees to feel more valued, because the table is actually turned now. The employers, especially the employees, I beg your pardon, particularly those ones that are highly skilled, are now in the driving seat. One of the things we've done as an organization is to embrace hybrid working, remote working, so the people have a sense of a better work-life balance. And that has been quite successful. The third point that I want to talk about is a bit more, should I say, unique to our industry. And that is around growing our business because of the sector we're in. So within the insurance industry, we actually have a very low penetration rate compared to some of our other clients. This is a country of over 200 million people. Penetration rate is around 0.5%. That is very, very, very low. And the reason for that is not far-fetched. One, there's a very low public awareness of insurance products, or trust, should I say. There are cultural issues around that as well. But more importantly, there are also government policies that make it perhaps challenging to operate in this environment. But nonetheless, we're seeing green shoots, if I can call it that, where the regulator is taking active steps to begin to not only just educate, but also to advocate for opportunities for people to see insurance as a risk mitigation strategy, particularly for businesses. We live in very volatile times now, and therefore it's very important to have risk mitigation strategies. I will pause there because I believe I only have a couple of minutes, and let the rest of my panelists share some of their ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. You touched on valid points, which we'll talk briefly on when the other panelists, are gotten a chance to share their perspectives. Vincenzo?
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot allowing me for the discussion. And thanks a lot also to Dr. Doyin. Yeah, I got very useful information. Let's say I will drive my answer to your question also more with a particular focus also on the industry that I represent today, which is the oil and gas industry. I will summarize the three primary challenges, let's say. In the first one is about what is required by the market. So we are in a cleaner energy. We need to provide the energy solution which will drive to less emissions. So first challenge is to provide solution which will have less emission. Second one, it's more finance. The second challenge of the market is about demonstrable and differentiable cash flow. This is the second challenge. And the third one is about, for a company operating in oil field as a service oil company or a kind of construction contractor, is the project execution. But let me, I will say, elaborate a little bit better. So the first is to provide a solution to national, I will say national, international oil and gas company, which are able to produce what? Lower cost, more energy, and less emission. And just to buy the chance of what also Mr. Doyin, Dr. Doyin said, we see an increase of energy demanding post-COVID-19. Despite the momentum and despite the conflict and the war we have right now in the area in the North Sea part of Europe, however, there is an increase of energy demand. There will be an increase in the next years. So at the same time, the world is demanding a cleaner energy. So oil and gas company must supply energy with less emission. This is a tough task, but this will arise occasion, will arise opportunity. And it's something that we will not back. It will take time, but there is a trajectory. The trajectory is up 2050. By 2050, we need to have zero emission, or even sooner. So this is a fact. There is no way back. The second, as I said, is also another challenge. The second challenge is also to demonstrate a differential, a durable cash flow in the oil and gas sector. Why? Because, and this is also peculiar for Nigeria, because there is been large number of investors fleeing away the oil and gas sector. In the past, many oil and gas companies outspent their cash flow in the name of the growth, but this is not any longer a situation that is still happening in the sector. So investors need to regain the trust on this sector, and they need to also maximize their return. So the companies have to focus on the capital discipline, and they have to return their money to shareholders. This is important for Nigeria because in the last years, there were many major and many investors fleeing away of the market, and we need to make them to return in Nigeria. So entities, they need to focus on what is the capital discipline, on the durable cash flow, because we need to return what is the amount invested with the spread to our shareholder. We need to make attractive again the market here. Third one is also, as I said, the project performance is a major challenge right now for a company which is, let's say, for a an industry where the opportunity are going. There are many opportunities, both in terms of oil and gas, in terms of construction, but the complexity of project is increasing a lot. All the companies are under the razor of team profit margin. A single project can jeopardize the result of each company in this sector. So the focus is on the project performance, and the project performance to make a performance executing within the budget and on time. And that's why, as my organization, as a SIPEM, we are focusing surely on bringing new solutions, suitable solutions to our client in terms of zero emission. But we are also very key focused on what are the financial discipline and the requirement of financial discipline and the project execution, because this market more sustainable. This is the way that I'd like to address these three challenges. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Vicencio, for that. It's clear that organizations need to do things differently going forward. Things that have changed, the landscape is different. And any organization that will be able to keep up with the present situation now needs to be agile in their thinking. I will have Funke now speak to us on how she's been able to tackle the challenges in our organization.
Thank you, Omolara, and good morning to the audience, fellow panelists, and Dr. Salami. Before I provide my response, it's useful to put it into context. UAC is a holding company. We've got subsidiaries across 6 different sectors. So across the group, there's FMCG, agro-allied, paints and chemicals, restaurants, logistics, and real estate. The 2 common themes that we've had to navigate as a group over the last 18 months has really been inflation and supply chain disruption. The impact of these is that price escalation has been seen across key raw materials in our businesses. I mean, the volatility of raw material prices is unprecedented. So trying to navigate in a high inflationary environment requires us to focus on our margins and balance other factors that will enable us to operate profitably. And to be able to address this, and I'm conscious that the audience is looking for tangible solutions. One is pricing. We have monthly price reviews now across our businesses, and pricing typically used to be something that would be looked at annually or even half yearly. But the purpose of ensuring that we're moving across with the inflation, we need to ensure that we're having more regular pricing meetings. Cost optimization is the second one. I won't say cost cutting because not all costs are bad. So the focus is on buying right, seeking alternatives. And if I use electricity and power costs as an example, we're all aware the cost of diesel has increased over 90% and upward pressure continues. So to optimize energy costs, we're aggressively seeking alternative sources and also starting to implement solar solutions, just anything to essentially reduce diesel usage. And to comment on how we address supply chain disruption, we found over the last 18-24 months that working capital is critical. As I mentioned, raw material prices have increased, in some instances more than doubled, which technically means you require double the working capital to produce the same amount of output. And what we've done across our businesses is to increase the cycle, which one essentially protects us against the rising cost. So you hold more inventory, and then it also ensures that in the event of disruption, we have sufficient raw materials to continue to produce. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you very much, Funke, for that. It's good to hear a perspective from your sector and how pricing all of a sudden has become one of the very critical things that you look at, and a lot of focus is on that. So I'll be moving quickly to Dr. Doyin now. I'm sure he's aware that based on the presentation that he's just given, there are a lot of questions here. And, it's clear that we need to do things differently. One of the questions that has come forth, is based on the fact that it appears that there's so much advice that has been given to the government. We are aware, based on your role and your position, as the chief economic advisor, there's a lot that has been communicated to the government. However, implementation seems to be where things are not really moving forward as planned, and appears to be a bit slow. Are you able to explain to us, what the key bottlenecks are basically that are hindering government from implementing these initiatives or advice that have been provided?
All right. I think there are a couple of points to note here. There is, and the fact that advice, don't forget, in my previous life, I used to be on the board of NESG, and so I was one of those who cheerfully doled out advice as to how I thought the world had to be or how we could fit into the world. But one of the things that must not be forgotten is that when you're an advisor, you offer advice and you offer that advice in the hope that your principal or those who you are offering the advice to will appreciate what it is that you're saying and be in a position to implement. So that's the first thing. Because what I'm now seeing, I've now spent, as I said earlier, I've now spent 6 weeks in post. And I am beginning to understand some of the, how do I put this, some of the reservations around. You see, that there's a presumption that we all make, which is that, okay, you and I and those of us, most of the people on this platform, because of your backgrounds, come from a particular set of understandings. Please don't make, as I'm finding, don't make the assumption that everybody comes from that understanding. And so part of the reason that I have found is simply, we now need to be breaking stuff down in a way that enables those that are the recipients or the intended recipients of advice, not only to understand them, but to appreciate how it is that and why it is that the advice that has been given is what is best in this sector circumstance. That's number one. Number two, as I'm now finding, when you sit in a company setting, it is very different from when you sit in a setting that is driven by a policy bureaucracy. And by the way, that policy bureaucracy, in my view, has over the years, and when I say over the years, I mean more than half a century of relying on government as where things kind of get done from. And so you say you want to build a road, the first instinct is, oh, it's coming from the government's purse. Oh, you want to build a hospital, So part of the challenge, and I must, commend Mr. Igboje, for the work that his foundation is doing in trying to enable public policy or the public bureaucracy understand where the world is at. Believe me, if I was in a meeting about a week ago where I was sitting, I had been invited to discuss some issues on economic policy with a committee of senators. And one of them had been a permanent secretary before, joining the National Assembly or, when his term had come to an end. And as he was explaining, how things work, then at least I got a much better understanding that we who sit out or sit outside rather, make a number of assumptions that what we are saying is so blindingly obvious that, it really does not demand any further explanation. It just must be done. Sorry, not everybody has that same view, and it is not for reasons of being malevolent or being mischievous either. And so for me, the market of ideas must not only espouse ideas, but also be very clear about a need to socialize them, advocate them vigorously, continuously, and consistently, but also speak to the issues around their implementation, understanding that those to whom you are pitching this are coming from a background that is fundamentally different from that from which you come. And so now, as I remind myself, now we are transiting to being able to stand between the two worlds.
Okay, so but what are we going to do differently? Because you mentioned the bureaucracy when it comes to policies. So what, I'm sure I speak the minds of many CFOs here. They would like to know what will be done differently to begin to see changes, you know?
Well, as I've said, it's not about, what will be done different. It is, as I try to be very clear about, there is a need for a level of engagement and socialization that is probably not been there. And I think the private sector owes it to itself to engage with and in that process. And which is why I, took the liberty of commending the work that Aig and his team are doing in trying to work in this way. And I think, fora like yours, yours and others must appreciate the need to engage policymakers, not just the political appointees, but you have to go to the guys who hold the nitty-gritty, who hold the nuts and bolts, who need to understand why certain things we think ought to be done in certain ways. I'm not saying that, they really don't, but don't forget that, as I said, there is a whole systematic and systemic arrangement that has brought us over a long period of time to where we are, and to expect that it's going to change simply because you say so, forgive me, as I'm now finding, as they say, cool temper, you have to engage more meaningfully.
Okay, I believe that's very clear. When Yemisi was speaking, she mentioned the fact that one of the areas that they are experiencing challenges has to do with talent. So I would like to hear from both Vicenzo and Funke. How is your organization really tackling this war against talent, the loss of talent? How are you tackling this?
I start?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. And so talents, word talents. So thanks a lot for the question. I would say that, first of all, let's say that if we talk about word talents, we need to talk about contest, and we need also to talk about a new talent form like talent code. So I would say that the overriding challenge of talent management will be its capacity to adapt to changes in order to achieve also a vision that is more connected to the reality. And today, I will not talk about more a kind of word talent, which is determined, because sometimes when we talk talent, we talk about how we need to keep our talent. We think that there is a shortage in the market, but this is not the word talent. I think today the word talent is more determined by the organization and by the incapacity of the organization to successfully address their connection to the context and to explain the business. So if we read the report today, above all, this is also, I think, a thought that is matured during the pandemic. If we read the reports or study available on the topic, we say that the population, the employees of corporation, most likely more than 50% of employees belonging to corporation are planning to change a job. So this is a trend. This is a trend that corporation cannot stop. So corporation has to deal with this trend. And how can deal? The corporation, the organization, the companies must understand that it is more about interpreting the context. For instance, this is important also for the multinational companies operating in different countries, as like my organization. We need to understand the field where it's necessary to build the organization's talent map. It's paramount important to understand that Nigeria is different from Italy, is different from US. The contexts are different, and the talent map to get and to at least to attract or to keep the talents is to contextualize, to have a clear context of where to build the talent map. Otherwise, in my opinion, organization, if we not understand, if we not catch this element, will be static and will pay two prices. The first price is they won't be able to attract new talent, but the other price is also they will lose, they will not be able to retain its own talent. And the context is important, is fundamental, but I think there is also a kind of question whether the organization are able to interpret the new talents code and to interpret also properly the new talents code. In the last years, in the last 10 years, the employees' language worldwide is completely changed, is drastically changed. Employee, a young talent, talks about smart working, teleworking, a balance between benefits, more equal distribution of what is the value created by the organization. So all these elements are new ingredients of the talent formula, which shall be addressed in the talent map, in the map that organization has to build. If I look at my organization at SAIPEM, I will say that surely as organization, we do things that all the organization does, training, try to create a more healthy environment of work. But however, I think what is distinctive for us, and is most likely peculiar of multinational company operating in different countries, we leverage on trying to encourage a kind of cultural, a global mindset by doing what? By rotating our employee through different cultural, also to gain international experience. So I'm Italian, I'm in Nigeria, but right now I have a colleague of mine, Nigerian, which is maybe is in Italy, is in USA, is in France. And why we do so? Because we have run some study internal organization, and we understood that the more we extremize what is the rotation, the job rotation between one country to another, so across the country, the more the level of loyalty of the employee will increase. So if we are not able to attract new talent, at least we will try to maximize the retention of our own talent. Thanks.
Okay, that's very clear. So let's just quickly take Funke's take on the war of talent, or the war for talent.
Thanks. Thank you. At the UAC Group, we haven't been immune to this relentless pursuit for talent. The landscape is increasingly competitive, and I acknowledge that, you know, when the entire world, including Nigeria, had to embrace remote working, it made the war for talent even more competitive. It's really being a talent, and I think, look, in fact, I've been trying to fill something as basic as a technical accounting and a group consolidation role for about 6 months. And that's been a struggle. But I'll focus on what we're doing and what we have done, and that is in 4 key steps. We are very deliberate about every hire across our group companies, and now a disproportionate amount of time is actually being spent by management to attract talent. So essentially, we're investing our time to make sure we get the right fit. That's one. The second one is ensuring we have attractive reward and incentive schemes in place. So we've actually gone and changed the remuneration structure across our group companies so that it links the employee reward to the value that they're creating. So either in linking their performance bonus to certain targets of the company, or for some of our businesses that are listed PLCs on the Nigerian exchange are entitled to a share-based payment based on performance. And again, this is just to ensure that there is alignment and, you know, top performance are rewarded. We create an environment where people feel respected, valued, and also challenged to go to the limit of their potential, and also a diverse environment. These are the things that we understand would sustain the interest of ambitious people in the long term. And the fourth thing, and it's the one that focuses on the big picture, is the reality that we face. It's not sustainable to continue to acquire talent, not only because of the cost, but because there are other concerns such as, you know, fit and culture. So we've taken a decision to grow our own talent. And every single one of our companies have put together a management trainee program. We've even taken it a step further and are partnering with organizations such as SEO Africa, who provide us with talented young graduates. And the idea or the thought process behind that is that you have a large pool of talented young individuals. They come in as graduates and they end up being the future leaders across either the holding company or our 7 other businesses within the group. So a number of things we're doing, but I guess in summary, we haven't been immune in this war for talent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Quickly, Yemisi, can you please, I know that while you were speaking earlier, you made mention of the fact that, the war for talent, you're doing different things. What's that one thing that you say you've done and you've been able to see positive results? Can you share that with us?
Thank you very much for that question, Lara. I think without repeating some of the things that Funke just shared, for us, the key thing really was to look at our hiring process to make sure that we have a pipeline for talent. We have been running a successful graduate training program for a number of years now. And I think part of that is to that we're able to attract the best talent, nurture them, because again, when you look at today's workforce, Gen Zs, the way you manage Gen Zs are probably not the same as you would manage my generation, because what really excites them is different from what we used to think. So I think some of those cultural shifts in how we attract, nurture, retain, manage our talent pipeline is critical, and that has been successful for us. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Yemisi. Now I'll be moving on to Dr. Doyin. There are a couple of questions here. One of it is on the load crude oil output level. It says there are insinuations around the fact that significant portions are stolen. Since you are advocating an increase in crude output, what's the government doing to curb the crude theft to increase the crude output you are advocating?
Sorry, do you mind repeating that question?
Okay, it's really around the fact that the crude output needs to be increased. Since you're advocating for an increase, there's some insinuation around the fact that there's theft. So how do you see this being curbed on the side of government? Or what do you believe can be done to basically reduce this crude theft?
Well, I think there are ongoing conversations around enhancing the entire security around Nigeria's infrastructure generally, not just crude, because we have seen damage and indeed fatal damage in some cases to infrastructural assets. And so the government certainly is working very hard. Now, I'm not a security expert, and even though I am not unfamiliar with some of the conversations that are going on, I'm not sure that it's in my role to say, okay, this and this and this. But what I will say very generically is that a lot of work is ongoing at the moment to deal with the issues around crude theft. Indeed, there are. You can look at some of these things from at least 2 dimensions. So there is the whole issue around security of Nigeria's waters and security of Nigeria's installations, because if crude theft is going to happen, then especially at the pace or the scale at which it is happening, then this is not small scale theft that is being, when you see some of the installations that that have been put that sabotage the pipelines. Believe me, Vincenzo certainly, I dare say, from their experience at Saipem, will be able to corroborate some of what it is that I'm saying. So in other words, there is a lot of work ongoing now in the review and implementation of a security architecture that provides a high level of security, not just for the pipeline, but also for Nigeria's waters, because it's not, they don't steal crude and put it in kegs and go. No, the kind of numbers that we're talking about. And by the way, let me also be very clear so that nobody misunderstands me. When I say we are producing 1.3 million barrels of crude, not all of that is theft. Quite a significant amount of that is simply shut-ins. In other words, companies that have chosen not to produce whilst the risk of loss is high. And my own sense of it is that things should improve very, very soon. So forgive me, but that is probably about as much as I can say, in that context. I'm not trying to shy away from anything, but it's not my job. If you had perhaps the National Security Advisor as your guest, he might be able to, he can decide what more you need to know.
Okay, thank you for that. There's another question here. It says that the growth trajectory that we have to take to the nation requires twice our present budgetary spending. With the dwindling foreign direct investment, what can we do internally to cover this expenditure gap?
Well, that is not going to be easy. I've spent more than 30 years as an economist. The first challenge that we have is that Nigeria as a country is collecting very limited resources from the productive activity that is taking place. If my recollection is good, our revenue to the economic size of Nigeria is probably about 6-7%. And the African average is double that. Indeed, I think I saw a World Bank report a few days ago, which suggested that we were one of the worst performing countries in terms of revenues accumulated, on the back of taxation of economic activity. So that is the nature of the context. The period that we are in doesn't help, because remember what I said earlier. We're just coming out of COVID-induced disruptions, and the economy in Nigeria and in other parts of the world remain fragile. And so this is not necessarily the easiest time to implement some tax proposals. But I dare say the government has in place a strategic revenue initiative on the non-oil side, and is now putting in place a set of initiatives that are designed to protect oil sector revenues. And in my view, significant progress has been made. I've been aware of this in my previous role as chair of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council. So I'm not coming to some of these, as how do we say, green ear, or sorry, wet behind the ears, rather, as perhaps, the recency of my appointment may suggest. So I am fully aware that there is a lot that is going on in terms of the efficiency of our taxation system, the coverage of our taxation system. However, there is one thing that we all need to put out there. Nobody likes to pay taxes. Let us all, just agree to that nobody, I dare say nobody on this platform today wants to have their taxes increased. And by the way, that includes me. So don't think that I am speaking beyond myself. However, whether we like it or not, we are going to have to make the case for raising revenues. You see, no matter who you point to, you say, okay, telecoms or technology. And globally, by the way, I'm sure you're aware, there is a lot of discussion and thinking about how best to tax technology. Here, globally, there's a lot of hue and cry over that. No, we are not having any of that. But hey, as I said, nobody likes to pay taxes. But there are specific initiatives that are now ongoing. However, what needs to be added to that is not just, yes, we must raise revenue. As I said earlier, the Nigerian resource envelope from the public sector side is too small. Let's not, make any mistake about that. But where we must also now go, in my own view, and which is a view that I will be doing my best to popularize, is that just as we have a finance act, perhaps we should have an investment act on an annual basis to see what elements of our investment environment need to change in order to make us a preferred destination for investment. Because finance, as the name suggests, is for the most part, how do we fund X, Y, Z? Then we must also look at investment, especially making the investment environment more acceptable, more attractive to private capital. I keep saying it, and forgive the repetition, that there's so much money out there that is looking for investable opportunity. The key question that Nigeria must resolve are to identify those issues that investors find a disincentive and to deal with them. I drew attention to the work that the Presidential Ease of Doing Business Council, the kind of work that they're doing. And now they're promoting an omnibus bill to try and amend some of the various legislations that they see and I see as hindrance to the ease of doing business in Nigeria. But one of the things that I continue to think about is, wouldn't it be an interesting idea to have an investment act on an annual basis that looks at those things that hinder investment into Nigeria, whether they be by domestic wealth holders or by international wealth? Because let's be unbashful about it. If Nigerians are not going to invest in Nigeria, then it is only the unsuspecting foreign investor who we are then looking for. Nigerians must be encouraged, like every other investor category, to invest in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you. I see that a couple of people in the audience are really echoing the Investment Act, and it will really be good to see that come to light. As we wrap up this segment, I know that there are other questions that we've not been able to deal with or address. Please be rest assured that we'll work with the panelists to provide responses to your questions via our LinkedIn KPMG CFO Forum LinkedIn page. On a final note, I would just like the CFOs, to just mention one thing that you would like to leave the CFOs with, in addition to all the things that we've discussed as we wrap up this segment now. Yeah, Missy.
I think for me, the key thought that I would like to share is really for my colleagues and fellow CFOs to recognize that our roles are changing, and it is important for us to be future ready. What I mean by that is that the CFO of the future is now part of the day-to-day decision-making process. You're at the table. You have to be able to influence decisions. You have to be the partner to the CFO, to the CEO, to make sure that the organization is running smoothly and you're achieving your strategic objectives. More importantly, it's important for us as CFOs to also begin to look at those things that are not value added, particularly around our back office systems, which should be automated so that we are producing staff that actually are more analytical in their approach, because that's where the value is. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Vicenjo? Vicencio, are you there? Or will Funke go?
Sorry. I had just some problem with the video. Sorry. Before to answer your question, one note aside, because I think the audience liked also the idea of Dr. Salami about an investment act, and I will really concur also because as let's say an actor of the market, sometimes the Finance Act, every year Finance Act or every 2-3 years Finance Act will create sometimes confusion for the organization because it's just changing something that has been created a few years ago. The organization has to, let's say, try to develop a kind of mindset in order to comply with the Finance Act, but then the Finance Act will change and then the organization has to again create a kind of customized approach to the new Finance Act. When I say Finance Act, mainly also to the chapter about the fiscal part. However, the Investment Act is something that is more oriented. It's a kind of, I would say, future forward oriented. And thanks, Dr. Salami, for pronouncing this kind of idea, because it's something that it's worth to pursue for the country. Something that is making Nigeria look in the future. Thanks a lot for this idea. It's brilliant. Thank you. While coming back also on your question, what is the role of CFO? What is more than the role of CFO? I would say the role of finance in general. Let me say that finance should be, I think, less data entry and more problem solving. The market is changing. Finance need to develop a kind of agility to support the business and to develop a long strategy for being profitable and for having a profitable growth, a sustainable growth in this changed market. Don't get me wrong, we need to lose the focus on cost and efficiency, never. However, we should have, as finance and as a CFO, a more broadly lateral thinking about what are the needs of business and how finance can address these needs. Finance shall become a kind of decision maker. CFO shall become a kind of decision maker, an advisor decision maker. Need to sit to the table of the decision, need to address all the needs of the business without losing the role of providing discipline and control in the business. Let me give you an example. I'm a part of an industry which is very capital intensive. More and more, the focus of our client, which can be infrastructure authority or oil and gas major, is on the discipline of the investments. So rather than to broadly invest to Kurt, normally the oil company or our client will select a range of projects with high return of investment. And normally they will not only choose a project as per kind of best price or because the bidder will present the most competitive price. Today, the focus, the war, let me move to it, a kind of war for talent. Today, we have also war for value to bring to client. Today, an EPC contractor is more focusing on what? On what are the financial needs for the client. The EPC contractor can be developed only if we bring on the table also financial solution. So financial solution able to develop the idea of investment that the client has in mind. Also talking about also getting the idea of what Dr. Salami said. Investment means to bring suitable solution in the country where we bring also package of investment. We elaborate as finance how idea can become alive based on the needs of client. So by producing financial solution like project financing, like a mix between contribution on equity by the owners and the lenders, by, let's say, vanilla loans, by syndicate loans. All those solutions today are part of my market I represent, and those solutions are brought on the table by finance. So if finance, we want to be in the future, CFO want to be in the future, a kind of chief value in the decision of the organization, shall change the mindset, shall be more close to the business. But don't get me wrong, we need to be assertive to the business, never servile to the business.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, clear. So quickly, I believe we just have less than a minute to wrap up. Funke, let's have your final take, please.
Thank you. I think most has already been spoken on, but we haven't really touched much on technology, and I'm conscious that we're going to do that in the next session. But at UAC, we're huge believers in the power of technology to transform all areas, and that includes finance. We're taking deliberate steps to invest in technology infrastructure across the group, things like Office 365, upgrading our ERP system to SAP S/4HANA. And why are we doing that? Because when you have better controls, better visibility into the value drivers, it ultimately results in better decision making. So when you have better insight into your payables, receivables, and so on, you're essentially positioned to be able to navigate any tailwinds that may arise. And the next level, and speaking to the audience, is to review the design of your finance function. The world is moving towards a leaner, faster, remote working environment, and even the profile of a finance person is changing in terms of the required skills to be successful. So that's also one thing I would want people to consider as they think about their functions. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, our panelists. Thank you very much, Dr. Doyin, Vicenjo, Yemisi, and Funke. It's been a very engaging session. And all the other questions that we've not taken, we will definitely be responding to them on our LinkedIn page. I'll now hand over to Uzo for the next segment. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Lara, and thank you again, our panelists. I'd like to take it from where Yemisi stopped. She said that the role of the CFO is changing, and we must remain future ready. And to take us through the finance for the future is Lawrence Amadi. Lawrence is a partner with our CFO advisory business, and it's a huge IT advocate and crusader. So I'll hand over to Lawrence now. And Lawrence, if we can keep it in 10 minutes so that we can round off by 11, that would be great. Over to you, Lawrence.
Thank you very much, Uzo. And good morning, Dr. Doyin Salami, our panelists, Vincenzo, Yemisi, and Funke, and CFOs present on this call. It's been an absolute pleasure having all of us. And I think if we just reflect on some of the key things that Dr. Doyin has shared with us, impact of Russia and Ukraine, some of the insecurity issues he's mentioned, some of the supply chain issues we've heard from the CFOs, the talent issues we've listened to. I guess we've got to then come down to what are the things within our control? What are those things that we can actually handle ourselves? And I think as we wrapped up the last segment, Yemisi and Funke started touching on some of this real quick. I'll start off with a few questions for all of us, which is on the next slide. And I think it's just for us to start reflecting on this to say, how many of us as CFOs have finance strategy? How many of us as CFOs have finance strategy? On the next slide, topic. And as we think about that, we also have to say to ourselves, how is the finance function that we run today, how is it responding to the disruption we see in the market? Both the things beyond our controls and the things that we can actually currently drive. We've listened to, please, can we go back to slide 18? We've listened to the CFOs share a few testimonials about what they're doing on technology, investing in SAP for HANA and the likes. But for all of us on this call, I guess we also have to ask those really tough questions. How are we posturing for a new level of automation altogether? If we had time, we would have done this on Mentimeter, or Slido, but unfortunately, time is far spent. So I would like us to just reflect on some of these questions. Are we giving consideration to adopting a new finance delivery model? How and when do we intend to start that journey if we have given that consideration? And the final question here for all of us is, do you believe that the CFO is best suited to succeed the CEO? We all know how crucial the finance function is, probably the most important back office function in any company today. So do we think the CFO is best suited to succeed the CEO? Are you the best succession plan? If yes or if no, why? And I think as we reflect on these questions, and I move on to the next slide, I think it's to just say, we as CFOs are so crucial to the organization. And we've got to start asking these questions around some of the 6 core levers we talk about. If we have a strategy, what are we doing with that strategy? How are we driving or powering enterprise performance management with that strategy? How are we driving or shaping automation in the direction that it helps us with decision making? We have the right insights around data and how we're also able to plan some of this supply chain exigencies that Funke highlighted when we had the session earlier. How lean and agile is the finance function? How modern is the workforce? I saw a few remarks or comments in the comment section where someone said, we've brought back some Nigerians who are keen to come back to the country. They might be costing us a bit on the payroll, but we are seeing immense value to their contribution in the company. How are we getting the right workforce to take our company to the next level? And how we're also considering all of the considerations around risk and compliance for finance, because we know you've got a lot of filing to consider, you've got a lot of reporting issues to consider. How are we thinking about all of those? On the next slide, I will just touch briefly on, a few, pointers that then help us start cascading or taking this point home. Because we have to then say to ourselves, how do we lead, with strategy? How do we lead from the front? How do we see that we are chief value officers? Extremely crucial. And as we think about all of this, we've got to think about how people cascade in to support us. How the reporting and the function, finance is able to transcend the traditional mindsets, how people view us. Because we have moved beyond just reporting on the numbers, driving the GL and the sub-GL to being core to the decision making. And I think it's important that we start posturing as such, because the CFO today is the custodian of strategy in most companies. Let's move to the next slide. On the next slide, we'll also just touch on a few key considerations on how we start layering also the ideas on technology, to taking this to the next level. How we taking the governance layer and seeing that we also overlay that, appropriately to giving finance the right posture and the right visibility. On the next slide, I have put a simple illustration. When we go to some really large companies, you would find, you might find so many GMs or so many, direct reports that point into the CFO. Today, organizations are getting leaner and saying to themselves, I don't need, 10 or 12 GMs, pointing into the CFO, because I've got to get a leaner structure. But in that leaner structure, how sharp and how laser focused is it? So this is an illustrative, it doesn't mimic or replicate what we all should have or must have, but it starts challenging how we look at the norm today. Because finance is then posturing to just having the right functions, drive the finance function for us. Do we have a strong technology, resource that is able to bring some of those leading thoughts to help us take our finance function to the next level? Because we may talk about these things, but if we don't optimize how we then deliver it, that's where we may have the potential setback. On the next slide, I think, in the interest of time, certainly have to move real quick. Tope. So I think it's to then say we have to start looking at, how we optimize the things that we've highlighted. And at KPMG, we have dimensioned this thing into 5 core service areas. Now, these 5 service areas, you potentially may start with, do we have a strategy? If we have a strategy, then maybe the next few questions we should be answering is, our current finance function, how is it operating today? What do we need to change about it? And this is where reviewing the current design of that finance function, becomes really important. So, do we need to assess that finance function and see that it is meeting that future ready state? And then that moves us into designing the right, finance function, designing the optimal finance function for us. And as we do all of this, the respective plugins that come from the other operational part of the business, that's where we start monitoring the performance of this business. What are those numbers? How is sales and supply chain, tying back into the GL? And how do we, carry out a dynamic capital allocation every year? Because we know how the budgeting cycle, process does take the organization. How do we start optimizing that entire process? And all of this dovetails into us having a proper transformative journey. On the next slide, as I start winding down, I think it's for us to then say that journey, the best time to have started it may have been some 10 years ago. But if we haven't done that, the next best time to have started that journey is now. So we've got to start saying to ourselves, how do we define the right scope? What are the key things that we need to look at? What's the future state that we are desirous of achieving? How do we start, planning or posturing for that future state? How do we put a proper roadmap that will take us to that future state? And then we've got to just finalize our roadmap because we have to align with the other, segments of the business that we support, and we then have to just take off on this journey. So this is, our reflection as we embark on this journey. On the next slide, basically is to say, take the step today, because it's about time we get activated on this journey. On the thank you slide, for those of us still following, the barcode here, if you have an iPhone and you scan this barcode, it takes you to the KPMG Thought Leadership website, and we will see a number of resources that we have created for free that takes us into a bit more insights. How we start looking into this journey, how we start making sense of this journey, and how we start also positioning to leapfrog on this journey, because the things that we're talking about here are within our control, and we have every right to want to start off on that journey. So this is my submit for us today. Uzo and everyone who's been here, thank you for listening, and also for following through on this. Happy to take a comment or two or a question or two if we do have them and if we have some time. I know time is fast spent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lawrence. And the journey to be future ready, it's not optional for us as CFOs. But if you have not started, it's a good time to start today. And there is just one question that we can take, and then we'll have to do the vote of thanks. So the question says, we often speak about finance transformation. Is it a journey or a destination? How do we know when we as a function have transformed? Lawrence, can you take this question quickly? And then the other questions we will have to share on our LinkedIn page, along with the questions that the panelists will provide answers to. Over to you, Lawrence.
Thank you very much. And again, just to appreciate our participants for staying true. I know it's 11 o'clock already. Is this a destination or a journey? It's a combination of both. And that's the only way to actually look at it. It's a journey and a destination. You've got to deliberately say to ourselves, how do we move the needle? Do we stay where we've always been? Some of us have very painful month-end process. Every month, we go through the same rigor, the same pain. And the question is, what do we have to do differently, to shift, from what used to be a painful cycle? That is the mindset we've got to start adopting. Some of us have talked about talent and how we can't retain people. Maybe they are burning out from this month-end process. And because we as the CFOs have refused to do something about it deliberately, these guys have then opted to go to Canada or the UK, where they're going to find, greener pasture, easier life. But the question is, we've got to say, if we are doing something the same way every single reporting cycle, then it's about time we say to ourselves, let's tweak it. Can we find a more agile way to closing the books? Can we proactively do a few things a bit more, efficiently and do them a lot better? We may have deployed SAP or we have Oracle ERP, but if we haven't quite optimized, how we leverage the systems to manage burnout, then we've got to ask those questions. So what are those key steps that we are looking at, both in the GL to trial balance, to the mapping, to closing the reporting cycle? What are those things that we're doing? So it's got to be tangible, and we've got to deliberately look at those things very closely. For some of us, it might be one controller who is sitting at the top of things, who doesn't want to move the mindset or the needle to how they close the books. That might be the problem. The finance people, that mindset has to change. Funke talked about hiring someone to close the role, and she's been 5 months at it. Hiring that person, should that person be an FCA, 20 years, GL, reconciliation guru, that's all they are? Or should that person be somebody who has deep expertise in SAP for HANA that can easily go to the FI model of SAP for HANA and bring out value to closing the books? Those are the questions we should be answering. Those are the questions we've got to say to ourselves. We have to move. And as CFOs, we have to then say to ourselves, if what we're doing before now hasn't quite changed, maybe we've got to look at those direct reports and say to ourselves, are you transformative in the mindset? Are you driving, a quick thinking, quick, an efficient, process-minded, process for us, as a function? That might just be answering the question, from just dealing with how we get on this journey. So, Uzo, back to the question. It is a journey and a destination, and everybody here collectively has got to deliberately take that step towards moving to a leaner and a more laser-focused finance function. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. A journey and a destination, and the full complement, not just the IT, the people, it's a full complement. Thank you. I believe that we have gained significant knowledge from this very short session. I will advise you to scan the barcode or visit the website, as there are even more information in the thought leadership material that we have that can help guide you. Feel free to reach out to us also if you will want to have a separate conversation as it concerns your organization. At this point, I would like to invite Bolanle Afolabi, a partner in our accounting advisory services, for the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Uzo, and good morning once again, everyone. We have come to the end of the session, and I believe it was quite insightful for everyone. And most of the takeaways from this event, I believe, will enhance our abilities as CFOs to navigate the current economic challenges that we face, as well as maximize all the opportunities for growth within our business. On behalf of KPMG, I would like to say thank you to Dr. Salami. I understand you had to leave at the time, but thank you for the insights that you have shared, particularly on the evolving spending patterns that we've experienced over the years, as well as the opportunities for private sectors. I would also like to appreciate our great panelists for sharing their views on all the key challenges from the sectoral point of view. We've also provided tangible solutions to address these challenges.
I'm using this opportunity to also request that you join us on LinkedIn. Thank you once again for joining the webinar, and do enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you, Uzo. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much, Bolanle, and thank you, everyone. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you again when we will invite you to another session, our CFOs. Thank you.